Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And loneliness in America is bad, and it's getting worse. In recent decades, participation in associations and clubs has gone down, while the percentage of people living alone has increased. The negative health consequences can quite literally be life and death. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, we were forced to isolate ourselves for survival. But the consequences of isolation pose a continued risk to our health and well-being. In 2023, former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy issued an advisory warning that isolation poses a health risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The treatment for our isolation? Connect with people, our neighbors, our friends, our family, and even strangers. So today, we want to focus on the places we gather, the parks, the clubs, the places of worship, and libraries. And there are so many places in and around Detroit that are crucial hubs for staying connected. So we want to hear from you. Where do you go to connect with your neighbors and community? The number is 313-577-1019.
And Tia, we're going to start the conversation today in Southwest Detroit with an organization that is a community space and has been for decades. Since 1997, in efforts to address gang violence, the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation has made it its mission to empower the Latino community in Southwest. It provides culturally rooted programs that are tailored to the needs of residents. And when other venues of support fail, community groups like DHDC are there on the ground to be a helping hand. And in many cases, simply having groups with the community's best interest in mind can save a life. Joining us now in studio to talk more about the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation is Anita Savala. She's the Director of Entrepreneurship and Wealth Building at DHDC. Anita, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation? What are its main goals?
We're a community-based organization. We've been in existence for 27 years in Southwest Detroit. And our mission is to develop the community residents so they have self-sufficiency, that they are control of their own destiny and have the tools they need to really be reaching their personal goals, whatever that may be, and to make sure that their goals are not limited, right? So to give people kind of whatever tools they need if they want to be an artist, if they want to be in tech, if they want to own a business, if they want to be great parents, to make sure that they have those, they want to own a home, that they have the tools they need to make those dreams come true.
Okay, so it's about empowerment. It's about helping people to see what is possible and then giving them the resources to make those dreams become a reality.
Yes.
Could you talk about some of the specific resources then that you're offering to help get folks to from a dream to reality?
So we start with our youth. It's probably the heart of our organization. We have a very robust youth program. And we have what's called the Best Buy Teen Tech Center there, where teenagers can come in and learn the Adobe suite of design. We have a green screen where they do visual arts, video, AI. They learn music production. We have a full music studio, professional music studio, where they can do both the sound engineering piece and then the actual writing music and producing their own music.
This is so Detroit. I love that.
You know, it started off, it's called Urban Arts Academy, right, that we've been doing for decades, you know, with the turntable, and we put foam on the wall and kind of built it out ourselves. And over time, it's developed to now this really high-tech, really beautiful space that we have where the youth can really develop their goals. But we really kind of center our programming on STEAM, so STEM plus arts. But it's also very indigenous practices rooted. We have healing circles, and we do a lot of indigenous practices to make sure that our youth are proud of who they are armed with knowing that they come from greatness. So when they get out into the world, they are great. So that's really where we focus with the youth. And we start with age 5 and we go up to age 24 with youth. We also have a huge robotics build center where we have, it varies between 8 to 12 high school teams in Southwest Detroit that build at our robotics center with First Robotics. So it's high school competition. These are production robots. If you've ever seen a FIRST robotics competition, they are really live. They're probably more hype than like a basketball game or
You're
football
not
game.
kidding.
Like they are turned up. So we have all these kids in there, and we have mentors from. We probably have 50 mentors from all the big three, from all of the kind of supporting second tier organizations that come and really teach the youth how to build robots. They're also doing like teamwork, marketing, and a lot of soft skills that are involved in FIRST Robotics too. So that's kind of what we do for our youth. And it's really taking the limitations off of what they can be, right? You can be more than just working at a factory. You can be the engineer in the factory, or you can design and start your own business. So we do have an entrepreneurship department. That's where I live. For the most part, my passion is small business and helping people kind of develop their business ideas. You know, Detroit, we're hustlers. Like, it's a hustle culture in Detroit. We are survivors and hustlers.
That's right.
But unless you grew up in business or you went to business school, you don't know how to formalize your business, right? And there are a lot of people who will take advantage of that. Let me file your LLC for $500 or something like that. So we have business classes. It's called Side Hustle to CEO. It's a 6-week class that takes entrepreneurs from ideation all the way through a business plan, financial projections, and getting them capital ready, basically, to apply for loans and grants. And then we link them up with all the other organizations that do that. There's a very robust small business development ecosystem in Detroit and Wayne County.
Anita, if we could go back to one thing, and that is the ways that Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation is building confidence among young people and the kind of transformations that you've seen and why you think that is so important, especially right now in this moment.
You know, my community as a whole is under attack. Excuse me. It's tough when you have kids in school getting bullied. It's tough when an over-policed community is now federally over-policed. And I apologize. It's been a rough couple weeks for us, right? Making sure that the kids know they're important and they're valuable. And just because our family is from south of the border, or many times indigenous to Texas or to Arizona or to Utah, and the border moved across them, does not make us different or an other, right? We are American just as much as the next person, and we are Detroit. My family has been in Detroit since early 1920s on both sides. So I'm 6th generation and 5th generation Detroiter. Our community has been here for a long time, and it is really important to make sure we arm our community with what they need to protect themselves, to protect each other, and to thrive despite the negative federal attack that we're under. So I will say that Detroit as a whole, we stick together, right? And I think it's really important that our community, it can tend to be isolated. And I know Southwest Detroit feels very like that's Mexican town or that's where the Latinos are. But Southwest Detroit is super diverse. Like, it is probably the most diverse community in the city. There's Arabic, Yemeni, all different type of Latino. It's not just Mexican. It's Puerto Rican. It's Dominican. It's Central American, South American. A lot of Black Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans. So white Americans. We grew up with everybody, right? So, you know, a call to prayer is just as common as the church bells ringing, which is just as common as somebody who's smudging and doing Native American practices.
I love that that vision or that sound of a call to prayer, church bells, and smudging. So I guess 2 sounds and 1 vision.
Yeah. And, you know, when you guys talk about like gathering places, where do you gather? We gather on our front porch, right? You gather on your front porch on a Sunday at 11 o'clock, and you're going to hear 10 different types of music. You're going to hear trap music. You're going to hear Mexican music. You're going to hear Puerto Rican music. You're going to hear country music. You're going to see my neighbors on their porch playing their banjos. Like, it really is a community of everyone. And it's a beautiful thing to see all the different cultures of people and their kids just playing and riding their bikes and being on the porch and vibing as neighbors, right? So in Southwest, we're tight. We're very tight, and it's a densely populated neighborhood, right? So when something happens to one of us, something happens to all of us, right? And we try to stick up for each other. So with our organization, yes, it is Detroit Hispanic Development, but really the key is Detroit development. We service anybody in the city and really in the region. We do have a heavy focus on downriver communities too, River Rouge, Ecorse, Melvindale, Lincoln Park. The Latino community has been migrating that way as gentrification has taken over Southwest Detroit. So we very much focus on making sure that we, especially the kids in those communities, they're not primarily Latino, and the bullying is pretty intense, right? So when they come to our organization and they see we have these beautiful murals on the walls that are done by local artists, and it's all depicting indigenous stories, and it helps them feel proud, right? And to combat the stereotypes that they're getting hit with every day.
Thank you for painting a picture of Southwest that is one that is really diverse and full of texture and sounds and smells and visions and so much. But as we talk about Southwest, we have to acknowledge what has been happening there most recently, which has been some extreme flooding, and it was amid some Arctic temperatures. On February 17th, a 54-inch water main pipe exploded at Beard and Rowan, and efforts to repair that continue. Talk about the damage a little bit, if you can, and what cleanup efforts have looked like.
The damage is extensive. We've been working, Detroit Hispanic Development, UNI, Congress of Communities, and Southwest Detroit Business Association, along with Southwest Pride, have been working as a community to receive donations and disperse donations to the families who are affected. And these families, their homes were flooded, their basements were full of water. Many of them, the water coming up to the first floor. So they don't have heat now. Their furnaces are done. They don't have hot water, or if they do have water, as soon as it started to thaw, their pipes were breaking in their house because they didn't have heat. They don't have washers and dryers. Some of them, their electrical service boxes were flooded, right? So they don't have electricity to the homes. So the city has put people in hotels, and there's a few hotels around the neighborhood, or not the surrounding community, they're in the suburbs, that are housing individuals where they can't go home, right? So living in a hotel for a couple of days is cool. Living in a hotel long-term is frustrating, especially if you have small children and you're all kind of just stuck in a room, right? You can't cook for yourself. A lot of these people left their homes on boats. They didn't take anything with them.
Which sounds wild. They left their homes on boats in Southwest Detroit.
It was crazy, and it's still crazy. Everything that water touched in the basement is contaminated now. So it's a process. The city, they are working very hard, and I appreciate that they're meeting with the community organizations. We are meeting with them every single day at 3:00 to talk about what we're seeing on the ground, what the community needs are, how they can be addressed, and they're responding, and it's changing in real time. This is like Detroit's first, I think, real natural disaster that we're it wasn't a natural disaster, but it's a disaster. And it's a first time for all of the city departments that are working on it. It's the first time something of this scale has happened in our community where the community organizations have come together. So it's very much a community effort. We are trying to make sure people have clean underwear and socks and food, and that they have the information translated. There's a lot of services that the city's supplying. There's an Uber line for them because their cars were flooded out and they don't have vehicles now. So they don't have home, they don't have vehicle, they don't have a lot of their supplies. They're displaced from their community. They are really far away from work, from school, from friends, from family. And the hotels, they're providing dinner, and it's hot dog every night, and that's going to get old after about 2 nights, right? It's been 10 days. So really figuring that out. The city's kind of coming up with solutions. We're coming up with solutions. We received a lot of monetary and physical donations that we're dispersing out to all the individual community members. We have a system to do an intake. So we're working that out.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're speaking with Anita Savala. She's the Director of Entrepreneurship and Wealth Building for the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation. We're talking about Southwest Detroit and all of its changes right now. And is this the best response, Anita, that you've seen from the city in terms of emergency response?
Yeah, I think so. I think the way that they kind of stepped forward immediately, took accountability, responsibility, and put into place systems to try to address it. Nothing is perfect, right? Especially when you're kind of making stuff up on the fly. There was a lot of like language barrier issues, translation issues, city, like the inspectors going to the different houses. You know, we're dealing with increased ICE raids and letting random people, opening your door for people that you don't know who they are is risky. So making sure that we're teaming up with them so that the community knows that they're trusted and it's okay to open the door was an initial hurdle, right? Making sure that the information was translated, making sure that people had access to it. Because not everybody's following the city of Detroit on Facebook, you know what I mean?
No, I was going to say, I saw so much messaging, but I was wondering, did it get to where it needed to go?
We did, I say the collective community organizations, we're first doing door-to-door health assessments and taking an intake from each home where people were home. What do they need? Who lives there? Do they have heat? Do they need heaters? Do they have water? Do they have power? Do they need a ride to school? And kind of figuring out exactly what they need on an individual door-to-door basis. And then sharing that information. We're packing care packages at our Delray Community Center and then dropping them off back to the houses because residents don't have vehicles.
And really quickly, because this one, I was scrolling the internet and I saw on social media, UFO Bar was also a place that was accepting donations. So where other places are accepting donations right now that they can and then let you know?
Yeah. So we're accepting donations at our location at 1211 Trumbull. There are donations being accepted at SDBA, which is the Southwest Detroit Business Association on Verner. They're accepting donations at Patton Park, and they're accepting donations at UNI. I don't have their address, but they are located right in the neighborhood as well. We also have a donation link, and there is a live community wish list. So you can see what community members need, and we're updating that as we're hearing back from them exactly what they need. Right now, it's a lot of like baby formula and cleaning supplies. And like I said, the clean underwear and socks. And we're trying to figure out laundry solutions. Nobody has a washer and dryer in their home now, right? And then the people at the hotels. So trying to figure out laundry solutions for them is kind of our next pivot. And making sure they have food sustaining long term. And that the people who are living in their homes with no heat, like the kids are getting sick.
Yeah.
And so there's health issues that we're addressing. The Red Cross is on site. The city of Detroit has a health department, a station truck on site. So we're just trying to make sure we make those connections, and especially those with language barrier issues that we have providing translation for them.
Yeah, so just speaking of the community and speaking of the communal connection there, because, you know, listening to what you're saying and hearing how it was an all hands on deck situation, neighbors, community leaders, you have the city helping out, but you also just have folks who are not even from the city of Detroit coming to help out. So can you talk about the importance of having community and if it differs from other spaces in terms of the way that community comes together?
You know, it was overwhelming. It is overwhelming, the amount of outpouring of support that the community and people who are not members of the community that just want to help. The donations were coming in really fast. I'd say that overall, the rough estimate is that we've raised over $30,000 in cash donations that are going to be being distributed in the form of like $100 gift cards to the different families, so they have direct cash support. And then like purchasing things that they need. So it's just overwhelming. And, you know, Detroit is a special place. We are survivors. And we look out for each other in a way I don't know that many people who aren't from here would understand. right? Yes. So for us as a community, to see the support that we've gotten with the negative connotation that's been kind of put out about our community federally, it just, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. We're going to continue to thrive. We're going to get through this small hiccup. It's not small, but it's going to be short term, right? It's being addressed. The city's dealing with it. We're making sure that all the community members' needs are being met as quickly as possible. And I think that lessons learned from this are going to be really good for the city as a whole in terms of resiliency moving forward. So I am very proud of us. I am proud of our city for sure.
Detroit hustles harder. That's just the way it works here. And just before we let you go, there are so many different spaces and places. You recently renovated the Rect space as well. So you have so many different places to gather. What are some of your places to go, especially when it's nice out and it's beautiful to be in Southwest?
So I'm going to do a little self-promotion. My favorite place to go on, if you have a Friday between 6 and 11, we have a Phantasma Market and Cafe at DHDC. It is an entrepreneurship program. It's a pop-up vendor market. It is about 25 to 30 local Detroit vendors. We are 80% women-owned businesses that pop up. I would say about 90% BIPOC businesses. And we have different themes. So we're going to do 11 events this year. Our next event is our Detroit Day of Fashion show. So we're featuring all Detroit designers. We do this twice a year. I think this is our 6th or 7th show on April 4th. So that will be from 6 to 11 at Phantasma Market and Cafe. And each month it's a different theme. So in May, it's going to be a tequila tasting. In June, we have Vibes with the Tribes event. That's a Native American centered event in partnership with them. And they have a Native American music festival and a mini powwow. And then we have a Pride event at the end of June. So the events tend to, change. Then in July, we're doing an event that's based on the history of Detroit and hip hop and the hip hop culture in Detroit that we're teaming with Motor City Dance Academy and several other local organizations. So most of our events are free. You come, you vibe, you shop, you support local small businesses, local entertainment, local artists. So please check us out. You can follow us at Phantasma Market and Cafe on Facebook, Instagram. You can look us up on Eventbrite. The fashion show is a ticketed event, but other than that, they're free. So we love to gather there.
I know we're out of time now because we are going to have you back to talk a lot more about Southwest and all the events that you have, especially April 4th, the fashion show. Looking forward to that. And especially May, tequila testing. That's my birthday month, so I'm down for that. Anita Savala is the Director of Entrepreneurship and Wealth Building for the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, Americans are lonely and getting lonelier. Staying connected with other people is critical, though, for our survival. But we need gathering places to do that. We want to hear from you. Where do you go to be with your people or to meet new ones? Give us a call, 313-577-1019. This is The Metro. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Americans are getting more isolated by the day. In recent decades, participation in associations and clubs has gone down, while the percentage of people living alone has gone up. And the negative health consequences can quite literally be life and death. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, we were forced to isolate ourselves for survival. But the consequences of isolation pose a continued risk to our health and well-being, too. Simply put, we need each other to survive. In 2023, former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy issued an advisory warning that isolation poses a health risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Deaths of despair, which are fatalities caused by alcohol, drugs, or suicide, have skyrocketed in the last 20 years.
That's right, Robin. And the treatment for our isolation: easily connect with people, our neighbors, friends, family, and even strangers. However, it's not as easy as it used to be. Today, we want to focus on the places we gather, like parks, clubs, places of worship, and libraries. There are so many places in and around Detroit that are crucial hubs for staying connected. And we want to know, where do you go to connect with your neighbors? The phone line is open, 313-577-1019. Now, joining us to discuss the importance of social connection in public spaces is Eric Klinenberg. He's the Helen Gold Shepherd Professor in the Social Sciences and Director of the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University. He is the author of several books. His most recent one is 2020, One City, 7 People, and the Year Everything Changed. He also led a widely cited study on the 1995 Chicago heat wave. That study revealed how crucial our social connections are. Professor Klinenberg, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So let's just start off with the Chicago heat wave. Just mentioned it. Can you tell us a little bit about that study? What did you measure in that study, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so that's a book about this extraordinary event that happened in 1995. It kind of failed to register as a big national event, and that's one of the puzzles in the study. But the remarkable thing is that more than 700 people died in just a couple of days, and they died of something as seemingly, manageable as the heat. If you live in Detroit, you're accustomed to hot July days.
Oh, for sure.
So I went into the city. I grew up in Chicago, and I know it well. But I went back to neighborhoods to try to understand what happened. And the thing that I was really curious about was to try to understand and explain why some neighborhoods were much more lethal than others, and why some places that looked like they were going to fare really poorly actually did well. So in other words, I didn't want to just get the first order thing. You know that the neighborhoods that were poor and racially segregated, left vulnerable, abandoned on a regular basis in Chicago were going to be hardest hit, and they were. But I wanted to go a little deeper, and so I started looking just within the segregated and poor neighborhoods in Chicago. Could you find places that had these surprising outcomes? And I found these pairs of neighborhoods literally separated by a street. The demographics were the same. And one place had really high deaths, one had low deaths. And the big finding that's really charged a lot of my work in subsequent years is that places that had what I came to think of as a weak social infrastructure were much more likely to have a lot of solitary deaths, people who died alone and at home, whereas places that had a strong social infrastructure, and by that I'm talking about the places that shape, the physical places that shape our ability to engage each other, strong social infrastructure meant you were much more likely to have someone knock on your door, connect with you, take care of you, and the death rates were way lower. I did that study a while ago, and in the years since, I've really tried to hone in on understanding how gathering places affect our lives.
And Professor Klinenberg, we have a lot of gathering places in Detroit, like Rouge Park, or our public libraries, and community organizations like the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, who we just spoke with, and all of those are free to enter. What about the places that require fee, like a stadium or a business or a restaurant, or even some of our music festivals like Movement? Do those count as social infrastructure as well?
I think they do count as social infrastructure. In my book, I focus more on publicly accessible places because those are things that we can really control a lot more in our social policy. And when we think about setting up a democratic society, we have some ability to decide, how much do we invest in things like parks and playgrounds and basketball courts and soccer fields and libraries. We have a little less capacity to do that in the private sector. But of course, the thing about the private sector places is they can be far more exclusive than inclusive. Right? So if I tell you, go to the suburbs outside Detroit and you'll find lots of beautiful country clubs, they're good for bonding with people who are like you in your country club, but they might not be the antidote for the kind of crisis in democratic society where we tend to hang out with people who are like us, but maybe not with other kinds of people. So I'm interested in places that are more inclusive, not the $12 ice cream shop, not the $6 coffee in a place that only takes a credit card. I'm interested in places like public libraries and swimming pools.
I mean, I think you're speaking to a lot of folks' hearts right now, especially here at the WDET. But recently, this changing tone a little bit here. Recently, we've seen some very tragic examples of what happens when our social fabric is so frayed that we simply walk past our neighbors, especially those in need. Recently in Detroit, 2 children froze to death in a car they were staying in overnight for warmth. Apparently, the heater for the car stopped working. As well, there were also 3 children who were found living in squalor in Pontiac, and they had apparently been living there for years alone. Their mother allegedly abandoned them as well, and they didn't attend school, but no one noticed or intervened with the kids for some help. So does improved social structure help to prevent tragedies like this one, or these that we've seen?
Well, there's some really basic things that a good society tries to do that involve just establishing the material goods we need to live decent lives: housing, heat, air conditioning in the summer, food, education. I fear this, like the stories that you're telling are stories of a society that's not living up to its own values. And I see a lot of that in the United States these days, and I fear that a lot more of that is in store, given some changes that we have from the federal government. We punish the poor all too often in this country. The work I did in Chicago does make it really clear that if you live in a more vibrant area, a place that has a strong social infrastructure, and I'll be more specific, that sidewalks where people can feel safe hanging out, and little parks and community centers, community organizations, libraries, athletic facilities, schools that are accessible. If you live in a place that has all those things, you're just more likely to be engaged with the people who live around you, with your neighbors. And one of the things happening in the United States today is that we're socializing with our neighbors less than we used to. We're spending a lot more time on our screens and a lot less time with the people on our block.
Professor Klinenberg, that's just, we talk about it often. Once again, we don't sit on our porches anymore. We don't just see who's walking around our neighborhoods anymore. So it's very, very, very important. Thank you so much for sharing that. You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about the places that bring us together and why we need them more than ever now. Where do you go when you need to be around other people? What's your go-to connection spot? The number is 313-577-1019. Our guest is Eric Klinenberg. He's the director of the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University and author of the book Palaces for the People: How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, Polarization, and the Decline of Civic Life. Professor Klinenberg, in your most recent book, 2020, One City, 7 People, and the Year Everything Changed, you followed 7 people as the country went through an election and the first stages of a global pandemic. What did you learn about humanity's need for personal connection when massive changes in society, culture, politics, and health are coming in tidal waves? I mean, I can tell you I was craving community at that time. I was reporting on a lot of death and despair, and it had me wanting that personal connection so much.
I think one of the really disturbing memories I have of that time is how numb we became to the suffering and death even of other citizens. I remember those, my first book about the heat wave, it takes as its point of origin the horrible fact that 700 people died in a couple of days in my hometown. And in the pandemic, we were looking at 3, 4, 5 heat waves in the United States on a daily basis for a year. And I think one way we became numb is that we really did get cut off from our communities and from other people. It turns out that talking to people on screens, which we did a ton of in 2020. We worked remotely, we went to school remotely, we shopped remotely. That didn't prove to be a really good substitute for the in real life physical interactions. And I think we grew distant from one another at a time when what we really needed to do to survive was to build social solidarity. And I fear that what's happened in this country since 2020 is we've really failed to reckon with the experience of that year. And we have forgotten what should have been an important lesson, that by building solidarity, by engaging with each other to work through the difficult problems and to enjoy the good times, we create the ability to be a better society and to make our democratic experiment work. And I can't help but see what's happening in the country right now, the anger, the distrust, the ideological polarization. I can't help but see that in some ways as a kind of dramatic expression of what really went wrong in 2020.
Professor Klinenberg, we're going to get into this a little bit more and see what kinds of lessons we can relearn in just a moment. Our guest is Eric Klinenberg. He's the director of the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University and author of the book Palaces for the People: How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, Polarization, and the Decline of Civic Life. We'll be right back here on the Metro.
Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today we're talking about the places we gather: parks, clubs, places of worship, libraries. There's so many in and around Detroit that are crucial hubs for staying connected. And it has us wondering where you go to connect with your neighbors and community. The number is 313-577-1019. Here with us to discuss the importance of social connection in public spaces is Eric Klinenberg. He's the Helen Gold Shepard Professor in the Social Sciences at New York University and author of the book 2020, One City, 7 People, and the Year Everything Changed. Professor Klinenberg, we've talked about how important public spaces really are, and you have also mentioned this present moment and some lessons that we perhaps need to relearn from just a few years ago. It seems like it's just getting harder and harder to stay close to people, to keep connections. And we've already mentioned the loneliness advisory that the former Surgeon General made. How do we turn this around? How do we reconnect? I guess that's the million-dollar question.
All right. Well, first, let me just say that I'm really sympathetic to the problem and the way that you identified it. It's a piece of good news for me is that I actually don't think that we're lonelier than we've ever been. I don't think we're more isolated than we've ever been. We're not getting more isolated by the day. We hear that kind of talk in the media all the time, but really the best social science we have tells us that we're more or less just about as lonely as we've always been, and we're just about as isolated as we've been for quite some time. So I don't want to get carried away with the problem. That said, I do think there's some huge challenges.
Professor Klinenberg, before we go on, forgive me for jumping in, but I just wanted to clarify, because what you said is so interesting to me, because what we have all thought is that, especially with the proliferation of social media, that we're all just this much more, we're that much more disconnected than we've ever been, because, you know, we're often glued to our cell phones. We're not present. So could you just expand on that a little more?
Sure. Well, that's a different kind of problem. And certainly everybody listening to this conversation has been in a room with someone talking face to face and have them pull their phone out so that you feel like, hey, wait a minute, I'm here. You know, we're not paying attention to each other, and I think that's a real problem. I mean, we are losing some of our capacity to be in the moment, to be where we are, to fully engage the people we're around, and we all know that it's just a terrible feeling to be with someone who's not here with us,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a struggle. That said, there's some countervailing tendencies here. So, I've got two teenage kids, and they have this amazing ability to hang out with each other and also to have like side conversations going on their screens that sometimes I think deepen their interactions with each other in ways that I don't recognize. I was a kid before the age of social media, and the people I had access to were fairly limited to me geographically, or maybe in my school area, whereas I see a lot of young people today gain the ability to build relationships with people who live a little farther away or go to a different school or do different things. So I guess I'm pointing out that the trends are not all in one direction. And in fact, if you look at the data on loneliness, maybe this shouldn't be a surprise, but we're considerably less lonely today than we were in 2020 and 2021 in the hardest times of the pandemic when we were locked down. And that is in some ways unremarkable, except when we say we're getting lonelier by the day, we're lonelier today than we've ever been, we're kind of forgetting that actually we're on an upswing, and we shouldn't forget that. And same with social isolation. Some reports just dramatically exaggerate the fact that some people are isolated. Now, I wrote another book called Going Solo about the fact that more people live alone than ever before, and that's definitely true. And that's an issue, especially for older people or people who live alone and get really lonely. But most people who live alone, I discovered, are actually fairly well connected to people around them. So my concern is, given that the sky has not completely fallen yet, how can we do better? We know that there are real problems in the way that our communities come together. We know that we're divided. We know there's a lot of inequality. And I try to focus attention on, how can we build better neighborhoods? How can we make a better city by making sure that people who live in areas that aren't full of country clubs and coffee shops and, expensive, basketball courts and ball fields, how do we make sure that those places have good gathering places too, right? That they have amenities that are comparable. And how do we create places that aren't just there for bonding so that we can get to know people who are like us, but that help us bridge our social divisions? Where are there places where you might encounter and get to know, befriend someone who's not like you, ideologically or ethnically or linguistically or culturally, racially? How do we start to build those bridges? Because I'm probably not the only person today who thinks that in some crucial ways, this democratic experiment we have in the United States is off the rails and maybe in trouble.
What do you think some of those spaces look like? I mean, I'm thinking about here in Detroit, we have this gorgeous river walk downtown, and it is, as Tia and I were talking about earlier, it's quite a scene on a Sunday night in the summer, and you're seeing folks from all walks of life, I would say, and you're seeing people of many different economic backgrounds, and you're hearing a lot of different languages being spoken. I love it.
Yeah, I love those kinds of places. They can be really nice for helping us see that there are other people who are, human and have the capacity to enjoy themselves and gather peacefully. And you need that kind of ability to recognize difference, recognize others, to share space together. I mean, that happens on the subway in New York City, where I live, on a daily basis. The next level of that is when you're actually doing things together. Right? So there's some shared activity that you're working on in some more coordinated way. It could be solving a problem. It could be playing a game. That can happen in a really terrific way if it's recurrent. So, for instance, like if you're a parent and you take your kid to the same playground at 3:00 every day, at first you won't know anyone, and you might notice that there's another parent who's pushing their kid on the same swing set. And you kind of nod at each other maybe. You go there 3 or 4 times, and you might pick up a conversation. You might even say, oh my God, I got a phone call that I got to take. Will you mind watching my kid for 5 minutes while I walk 10 feet away? And then, you suddenly find yourself having a play date and meeting their friends. I grew up playing pickup basketball every day in Chicago, and the basketball court is a place where I learned who I am and develop friendships that stay with me to this day. we need those places where we aren't just seeing each other, but where we're also doing things together. Libraries are classic for that. Amazing things happen in branch libraries and city libraries today. But my fear is that, especially as we start to cut public money for all of these important programs, we see the library budget go down. We see the parks budget go down. We see, a cut in funding for after-school programs. As we start to do that, we really hurt people who need those gathering places the most, and we also wind up hurting our democratic society.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're talking about the places that bring us together and why we need them more than ever. Our guest is Eric Klinenberg. He's the Helen Gold Shepherd Professor in the Social Sciences at New York University and the author of book 2020, One City, 7 People, and the Year Everything Changed. Now, I just want to go back really quickly because you talked about young people, and I especially am connected to young people, my nieces and nephews. They seem very connected all the time, whether it's on the phone, whether they're just in a room with their friends, they're always together. So if you can expand on that just a little bit and talk about how we're seeing Gen Z and now even Gen Alpha gathering and being together.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about it. I do think that as anybody who encounters younger people does, I mean, I worry about kids who are spending so much time at home on their screens doing something that they consider to be social, but that people in my generation don't think is as richly social and engaging because it's not face to face. I just worry about the sedentary nature of screen time and the way it's kind of pulling kids out of the kind of more public realm where they can have some different kinds of serendipitous encounters with each other. That said, I guess 2 things I'd say. One is we grown-ups in the room probably need to take some responsibility for this because, it used to be that we let our kids be free-range people, right? They got to roam around after school. Nobody on earth knew where I was in Chicago in the 1980s.
Street lights came on, you were back home?
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. But between like 2 o'clock or 2:30 in the afternoon and 6 o'clock when it got dark out, no one on earth had any idea where I was. And Chicago was so objectively dangerous compared to what it's like today at that time. We just ran around. And then parents started supervising and planning and in some ways distrusting their kids, making sure that they were programmed all the time. And I think a lot of kids discovered that going online was the way to establish some privacy and autonomy. There's a great scholar named Dana Boyd who's written a lot about this phenomenon. Back in the day of MySpace, she saw this coming. But the other thing is that I think another failure of the grown-ups in the room is we have failed to make the public spaces in real life as attractive and appealing as the designers have made all of our apps.
So Professor Klinenberg, I want to jump in really quickly here because we actually are getting down to the wire here. So in a minute or less or so, because you're talking about exactly what we're going to talk about, the investment needed at this point in our social infrastructure. I mean, we here in the city had tons of rec centers and pools and different things that we could do throughout our neighborhoods. We're starting to see it come back, but it's still not what it was. So talk about that investment in social infrastructure.
Well, that's my big argument in the Palaces for the People book, and it just says, we had a period in the United States where we built out public libraries that are the envy of the world. We built swimming pools around different neighborhoods. We built parks and playgrounds, recreational facilities of all kinds. We built out public schools. We made a massive investment in ourselves. That's social infrastructure. It's the material that lets social life happen. And in the last few decades, we've just totally neglected it in not every place, but in a lot of places we have. And we've pushed people into the private market where if you got a lot of money, you got no problems. And if you have less money, you got big problems. And we've created a more unequal, divided, polarized society where distrust can flourish. So my call is we need to take social infrastructure seriously and invest in it because we're investing in each other that way.
Eric Klinenberg is the Helen Gold Shepherd Professor in the Social Sciences at New York University and the author of the book 2020, One City, 7 People, and the Year Everything Changed. Professor Klinenberg, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you. Wish you well.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, Carrie Jr. II, and Jack Philbrandt. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Our senior producer is David Lyons. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.